A Second Chance at Love. Previous episodes are available in playlist, a link is given in the video description. Episode 23. Lucian's brows knitted into a tight knot as he replied in a low voice, "Okay. I'll do my best to control myself." Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief and turned to walk toward Alfred's room. "I think that Grandpa should be awake now. Let's go inside. To be honest, he will be incredibly happy to see you since you have not been able to visit for a long time." "I really was pretty busy recently," Lucian said as he caught up with Jonathan. "And yet, you still had the time to go to Summer Bank with Dr. Jarvis." Jonathan teased when Lucian recalled the events that had happened in that particular city, his face darkened. "I just happened to have work to take care of in Summer Bank." Jonathan smiled wordlessly. The two men walked over to Alfred's room, and Jonathan raised a hand to knock on the door. After hearing Alfred's voice from inside the room, they opened the door and walked in. "Grandpa, Lucian is here to see you," Jonathan said to Alfred with a smile after entering the room. "Hello, old Mr. Queen," Lucian greeted politely. Alfred had just woken up from his nap. He tried to push himself up into a sitting position. Jonathan quickly walked over to give Alfred a hand while Lucian filled some water into the cup that was on the table. The latter then walked over to Alfred and passed the cup to him. Alfred took a sip of water and smiled at the young man next to him. "Things aren't as busy over at the company anymore?" Lucian nodded. "Things are pretty slow at the office these days, therefore I decided to come and visit you. How have you been lately?" "I've been feeling much better. As for you young people, please remember to take care of yourselves as well. Don't overwork yourself," Alfred said in contentment. "I will. Don't worry," Lucian promised. Jonathan reminded, "Grandpa, Dr. Jarvis is here as well. She's currently waiting downstairs for you." Upon hearing that Roxanne was here, Alfred glared at his grandson. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? Help me up." With that, Jonathan carefully helped Alfred down the bed. Roxanne had been waiting downstairs for a while when she saw Alfred walking down the stairs. She quickly stood up and greeted him. "Please, have a seat. There's no need to be so polite." Alfred smiled and waved his hand dismissively. Even so, Roxanne waited till Alfred had taken his seat on the couch before sitting down herself. Jonathan sat silently at the spot that was furthest from Roxanne, leaving a place beside her for Lucian. Noticing that Lucian was sitting incredibly near her, Roxanne pursed her lips and shifted her body, trying to widen the distance between them. Lucian frowned in displeasure when he saw her movements. "The medical consultation is going to start next week at the orphanage located on the outskirts of the city. How are your preparations?" The old man was oblivious to what was going on in the younger generation's minds. He looked at Roxanne with concern in his eyes. "I'm mostly done with my preparations. I've been doing research on congenital diseases among children recently," Roxanne replied. After knowing that the recent medical consultations held by the Damaris family were all aimed at children with congenital diseases, Roxanne specifically searched for previous records on the diseases. She even analyzed the medical records of children that the Damaris family had treated. After studying those documents, Roxanne managed to gain more knowledge. Alfred smiled kindly. "It looks like you've put in a lot of effort. However, there's no need to put too much pressure on yourself. Meanwhile, Alfred was trying to persuade Roxanne to consider Larry. You're still young. You shouldn't be putting your entire focus on work. I heard that Larry would be at the upcoming medical consultation as well. I remember the two of you getting along pretty well during my birthday celebration previously. After hearing the old man's words, Roxanne felt rather speechless. Alfred seemed to be especially concerned about her love life. First, he suggested that she consider Jonathan. 2 days ago, he brought up the representative from the Damaris family, and now, it was Larry. She was rather impressed by the man's efforts in trying to get her attached. You and Larry are quite compatible since you are both practicing medicine, Alfred emphasized, having put some thought into the situation. As Roxanne felt bad to reject his suggestion immediately, she looked at the man awkwardly and replied, "I'll think about it after the medical consultation. That's all that's on my mind now. I'm not in the mood to think about anything else." Alfred gave the woman a disapproving look before saying, "Even though you can wait, your 2 kids can't. They're still so young. After all, you are Harvey's student. You should have some confidence in yourself." Roxanne nodded obediently. Alfred then turned to look at Jonathan. "Go and bring me the recommendation letter in the drawer of my study," he instructed the latter. Jonathan nodded and got up. Before he walked toward the stairs, he worriedly glanced at Lucian. He was afraid that Lucian would start arguing with Roxanne once he left. How can they grow up without a dad? Seeing how persistent Alfred was, Roxanne's head was starting to hurt. Besides, she could feel the surrounding atmosphere getting increasingly tense. The woman had a crease between her brows as she glanced at Lucian, who was wearing a grim expression, and could feel her temples throbbing. Just when she was thinking of how to end the topic, Lucian spoke. Old Mr. Queen, Dr. Jarvis had brought up her kids all by herself all these years. If she really were to find them a dad, she would have to consider it carefully. I don't think you need to worry about it. Alfred frowned when he heard that and sighed. You're right. You have it easier than Dr. Jarvis in this aspect. After all, you have Aubrey taking care of Essie, and the 2 of you are also getting married soon. If you know of anyone suitable for Dr. Jarvis, you should introduce him to her. Lucian's eyes darkened. After shooting a glance at Roxanne, he replied curtly, "Okay." After accidentally meeting Lucian's gaze and hearing the conversation between the man and Alfred, conflicting emotions welled up in Roxanne's heart. On the other hand, Alfred, who was feeling rather satisfied with Lucian's response, changed the topic back to the medical consultation. Just then, Jonathan walked down the stairs with the recommendation letter in his hand. When he reached the first floor, he detected the tense atmosphere in the room at once. Having a bad feeling in his heart, he hurried toward Alfred and said, "Grandpa, here's the recommendation letter." After passing the letter to his grandfather, Jonathan cautiously took a quick glance at the 2 people beside him and noticed that their expressions were obviously darker compared to earlier on. Roxanne was still smiling a little while discussing matters regarding the medical consultation with Alfred. However, Lucian was completely expressionless and was exuding a frightening aura. After watching Roxanne leave, Lucian's gaze darkened. The next moment, he stood up casually and said, "Old Mr. Queen, I suddenly remembered that I have to settle something at the office. I'm really relieved to see that you're recovering well. If there's nothing else, I shall make a move too." Alfred furrowed his brows slightly when he heard that. He remembered Lucian telling him that he was free those 2 days. As such, he found it strange that the man suddenly said that he was busy. However, Alfred was understanding, knowing that Lucian was responsible for the entire Farwell group. "I had wanted to ask you to stay for dinner, but since you're busy, I won't keep you here any longer. You should get going now." "Work is more important," Alfred said before continuing earnestly, "remember to get enough rest and take care of your health." As Alfred was engrossed in the discussion with Roxanne, he did not notice it. Jonathan sat down next to his grandfather nervously, feeling confused. He wondered what had happened during the short time he was away. Roxanne had noticed Lucian casting intermittent glances at her but tried to suppress the uncomfortable feeling in her heart. When the topic of the medical consultation ended, she took the opportunity to take her leave. "Old Mr. Queen, if there isn't anything else, I shall not disturb you any further. I had intended to check on your condition, but today doesn't seem appropriate for that. I'll come again another day," she said to Alfred. Without thinking much about it, Alfred handed the recommendation letter to the woman and said goodbye to her after reminding her about some matters. Lucian agreed and turned to leave. When Jonathan saw that his friend was going off, he stood up immediately and followed Lucian. "Wait. I'll walk you out." When the 2 men left the house, they saw Roxanne, who was already reaching the mansion's entrance, right away. Just when Jonathan was about to say something, Lucian was 1 step ahead of him. "WC dat I know what you want to say. I'll take note of that." After saying that, Lucian strode away immediately without waiting for his friend's reply. Jonathan sighed helplessly as he watched Lucian approach Roxanne. Roxanne was waiting for the housekeeper to open the gate for her at the entrance of the manor when she heard footsteps coming from behind. She turned around instinctively and met the man's cold gaze. Roxanne was stunned for a moment when she locked eyes with Lucian. After regaining her senses, she took a step toward the side and nodded slightly as a form of acknowledgement. Even though there was still some distance between the 2 of them, Roxanne could clearly feel the cold aura exuded by the man. The woman dug her fingers into her palms to calm herself down. She was eagerly waiting for the gate to open so that she could get into her car and not face Lucian anymore. However, Lucian did not intend to let her off so easily. When Roxanne saw the gate opening, her eyes lit up and she started walking outside. After taking just 1 step, a large hand grabbed her wrist. "Ms. Jarvis, are you just so eager to avoid me?" Lucian's voice rang out next to her, sounding somewhat angry. When Roxanne heard that, her expression froze before she stopped walking and turned to face the man. "Mr. Farwell, we can talk if you have something to say, but please let go of me." After saying that, she tried to struggle out of Lucian's grip. Roxanne did not want to make a scene at someone else's house, and nor did she want to create any more misunderstandings. However, the man tightened his grip and said, "Ms. Jarvis, do you really intend for Mr. Morrison to become Archie and Benny's father?" Lucian's voice was so frosty that it sent chills down Roxanne's spine. Roxanne found the man's question extremely ridiculous. Looking at Lucian in disbelief, she said, I've already told you that Larry and I are just friends. Mr. Farwell, please stop making such baseless statements. Lucian let out a cold snort before replying, baseless? Ms. Jarvis, you seem so comfortable wearing Mr. Morrison's clothes. What other basis do I need? Besides, when old Mr. Queen mentioned Mr. Morrison just now, you didn't deny it as well. Roxanne froze when she heard that. When did I wear Larry's clothes? The only time she could recall wearing his clothes was when they were in Summer Bank. Back then, he had only lent her his jacket as she was freezing. However, at that time, Lucian had already left. How did he know about that? Suddenly, a speculation popped up in Roxanne's mind and she glared at the man furiously. Did you send someone to spy on me? She had asked him the same question before when they were in Summer Bank, but the man had denied it. As such, Roxanne had assumed that she was just overthinking. However, if he did not do that, how could he possibly know so much? Ignoring her question, Lucian stared at Roxanne coldly and continued asking. How far has your relationship with him progressed? Roxanne had a deep crease between her brows when she heard that question. With a stern voice, she replied, Lucian, stop being ridiculous. There's absolutely nothing between Larry and me. Even if there is, it's none of your business. What right do you have to interfere with my personal life? Lucian clenched his fists and tried hard to suppress his rage. The atmosphere was getting tenser by the second. Roxanne felt exhausted talking to the man, who was acting in such a stubborn manner. Mr. Farwell, please know your place. A few seconds later, the woman looked away and said coldly, I have to go now. Please let me go. When Roxanne felt Lucian loosening his grip, she retracted her hand at once and looked up at him. Mr. Farwell, Larry and me are really just friends. As such, please don't give him any trouble. Also, I would appreciate it if you could stop keeping watch on me. After saying that, without waiting for Lucian to reply, Roxanne turned around and got into her car at once, as if she could not wait to get away from the man. Lucian was only jolted back to his senses after Roxanne's car disappeared into the distance. He then slammed his tightly clenched fists into the car door. Even though he knew that Roxanne was right when she said he was in no position to interfere with her personal life, he could not help feeling angry at the thought of her getting close to another man. Lucian. Frida, who had just returned home, spotted Lucian at the gate and approached him excitedly. However, when she got closer to him, she could clearly feel the cold aura surrounding the man. Sensing that, Frida's heart skipped a beat. The terrifying look on Lucian's face had made her forget what she wanted to say to him a moment ago. But unfortunately, she already caught Lucian's attention. When Frida met Lucian's chilly gaze, her mind went blank and her smile froze. Are you leaving? Yeah, Lucian replied coldly. Feeling extremely nervous, Frida tightened her grip around her bag and asked in a fluster. Is Aubrey recovering well? I haven't visited her these 2 days, and I'm not sure how. Without waiting for her to finish her sentence, Lucian shot the woman a cold glance before opening the car door and getting into his car. Frida's voice stopped abruptly as the car door slammed shut right in front of her. The next second, the car sped away, almost grazing her body. Frida got a shock and took a few steps backward at once. She was only able to regain her composure after Lucian's car disappeared from her sight. After standing by the gate for a few more moments to collect herself, she turned around and entered the mansion. Meanwhile, Alfred and Jonathan were sitting on the couch while talking about office matters. When they saw Frida entering, the two men looked toward her simultaneously. "Grandpa," Frida greeted Alfred before sitting down next to him. Hugging his arm affectionately, Alfred had always doted on Frida. Although he had flared up at her previously, it had already been a few days. Besides, Roxanne's matter had been settled as well. As such, he was no longer mad at his granddaughter and acknowledged her with a smile. "Where did you go?" Jonathan looked at his sister with a frown. "I went shopping with my friends," Frida replied sweetly. After saying that, she looked at her brother cautiously and continued, "Lucian was here just now." Jonathan cocked his brows and asked, "How did you know that?" When Frida thought of what happened at the gate earlier on, she sulked and complained, "I met him at the gate just now. He's in such a bad mood. I wonder what got into him." After hearing what Frida said, Jonathan subconsciously turned to look at Alfred. Alfred appeared puzzled. They were happily chatting not too long ago. Then, Lucian said something had cropped up at work and left hurriedly. Yet, why did Frida say he had appeared angry? Judging from Frida's demeanor, Lucian was clearly quite annoyed. Did something happen at work? On the other hand, Jonathan could guess what had happened. He knew Lucian must have argued with Roxanne again. Although he tried his best to create opportunities for the both of them to patch up, it seemed pointless as all their meetings would always end with an argument. "I wonder if they are sick of fighting so much, because I sure am tired of watching them do that." Looking at Jonathan and Alfred's reactions, Frida was baffled. At first, she thought Lucian was irked with the two of them. However, she realized then they were not the cause of his irritation. So why is he so angry? He did not even react when I brought up Aubrey. After leaving the Queen residence, Roxanne glanced at her watch and noted that it was still working hours at the research institute. Hence, she decided to head back there. On her way there, Lucian's words rang in her head relentlessly. And she felt tormented. It was not the first time he questioned her relationship with Larry. If the clock were to turn back to 6 years ago when they were still a married couple, Lucian would never ask her such questions. He would not be bothered by how close she was to other men. On the contrary, he might even feel at ease with it. Now, they were no longer related. Yet, Lucian was harping on the issue and even grew mad with her. Roxanne could no longer tell what he was thinking. When she returned to the research institute, Colby was still working in the research facility. He turned around and was surprised to find Roxanne there. "I thought you went to the Queen residence. Why are you back this quickly?" Acting unbothered, Roxanne shrugged. "After I wrapped up my business there, I came back." Sensing something off with Roxanne's reaction, Colby continued to look at her with concern. However, Roxanne buried herself in work straight away. After she noticed Colby staring at her, she merely smiled faintly at him. In spite of that, Colby felt upset when he saw her gaze. Judging from Roxanne's expression, he knew she was not ready to share anything. As such, he did not pursue the matter and could only watch Roxanne remain in low spirits. The only thing he could do was help her with her workload at the research institute. With that in mind, Colby started with some of Roxanne's work. That took Roxanne by some surprise. The Damaris family's medical consultation should be happening in a few days, right? Colby asserted. You should prioritize that and prepare for it. Leave your research institute duties to me. Hearing that, Roxanne pursed her lips before she hesitantly replied, "Thank you for your help." Colby smiled back at her reassuringly. The rest of their colleagues in the research institute also knew that Roxanne would attend the Damaris family's medical consultation. Therefore, they did not hesitate to offer their help too. Dr. Jarvis, you should take the time to prepare for the medical consultation and help boost the name of our research institute. Dr. Jarvis, don't worry. We are here to help with the work so you can have peace of mind to focus on the medical consultation. Everyone knew the Damaris family was reputable in Chennara's traditional medicine scene. If they could gain the Damaris family's favor, it would help make their research institute seem more esteemed. Roxanne felt touched by everyone's supportive words. After she thanked them, she returned to her office. Roxanne was the only one in the empty office. She turned on her laptop, intending to research more about congenital diseases among children. However, she could not absorb anything she read. Her initial plan for coming back to the research institute was to work as she hoped to use it to forget about Lucian's words earlier. Little did she expect everyone to be so supportive about the medical consultation. Sitting alone in the office, she could not decipher her mixed feelings. She could not retain much information even after staring at the screen for a long time. Right as she reached the peak of her frustration, her phone suddenly rang. Roxanne picked up her phone and froze when she saw who the caller was. Although she was hesitant, she still decided to answer the call. "Roxanne, how is your preparation coming along?" It was Larry on the other end of the line. Suppressing her emotions, Roxanne calmly replied, "I'm still trying to understand the Damaris family's research approach. How about you?" Larry chuckled. "Me too. However, I will be going there with the intention to learn, so I did not prepare much." After they exchanged some of their findings, Larry suggested, "The medical consultation will be happening this weekend, and it will be out of town. I could swing by to pick you up and head to the medical consultation together. What do you think?" Previously, Roxanne had already agreed to go there with him. Despite so, when Larry brought it up again, Lucian's furious expression appeared in her mind's eye. A short moment of silence passed. Massaging her temples, Roxanne answered in an apologetic tone, "Larry, I think I will head there on my own." Instantly, Larry frowned when he heard her reply. "What's wrong? I thought we agreed to go to the medical consultation together. I went to old Mr. Queen to get a recommendation letter from him earlier. By chance, I found out that the Morrison and Damaris families are well acquainted. Old Mr. Queen thinks I could get to know the Damaris family better if I headed there with you. However, I would rather rely on my own abilities instead." It was not an excuse she thought of on the spot. In fact, that had crossed her mind while she was in the Queen residence. When Jonathan brought up the relationship between Larry and the Damaris family, she felt comforted. At the same time, she realized it was not how she wanted things to pan out. It was true that she could use Larry's relationship with the Damaris family to her advantage. That way, when the Damaris family decided on who to collaborate with in the future, she would gain priority. However, she worried the Damaris family would give her special treatment during the medical consultation. As a result, she might not be able to showcase her full strengths to them. Ultimately, she hoped to gain the Damaris family's favor through her own capabilities. After listening to her reply, Larry remained quiet for a while. Then, he cheekily stated, "All right. You can have your way. However, do not pretend we are strangers during the medical consultation, okay?" He was well aware of Roxanne's character and knew she never liked to rely on others. At the same time, he also knew how capable she was and believed she could impress the Damaris family without his help. Therefore, he was not surprised when Roxanne rejected his offer. Roxanne chuckled. "Okay. If you need anything during the medical consultation, feel free to look for me." The night before the medical consultation, Roxanne inevitably felt nervous. After dinner, she headed to her study early and planned to go through all the information she had gathered over the past few days. Only a few minutes had passed when she heard a knock on her door. Roxanne looked up from her laptop and called out, "Come in." As soon as she spoke, Archie and Benny pushed open the door and walked in with a smile. Archie had a cup of coffee while Benny carried a plate with a slice of cake. Carefully, the two children placed the things down on the table. "Thank you, darlings," Roxanne cooed as she lovingly ruffled their hair. Archie and Benny grinned before curiously peeking at Roxanne's screen. When they were abroad, the boys spent much of their childhood in the research institute. Having been in that environment, they had acquired some basic knowledge, so they had a rough idea of what was easy or difficult. After reading some of the information on Roxanne's laptop, the children quietly looked away. Despite their knowledge, Roxanne's preparation work was still too advanced for them. "All the best, Mommy!" Benny cheered. "Although I might not be as skilled as you in traditional medicine, I could still give you some ideas," Larry continued. "Sure," Roxanne agreed with a smile. Then, they continued to exchange a few more words before they ended the call. Finally, Roxanne felt more composed to continue her preparation. Before she got off work, she had thoroughly analyzed all her research. Roxanne could not help but smile at the encouragement. "Thank you, darling. I will try my best." Beside her, Archie puffed up his chest to act like an adult. He nagged, "Mommy, do not stay up too late. Since the medical consultation is an important event, you should have a good rest to perform your best tomorrow." "Yes, I will," Roxanne readily agreed. "Mommy, you are already very skilled. Even if you do not prepare anything, I'm sure you will shine the brightest tomorrow," Benny quickly added to gain some brownie points. Their words only made Roxanne amused. She planted a kiss on their foreheads and replied, "Thank you for supporting me. I will do my best tomorrow. Meanwhile, both of you should go to bed. After I finish reading this, I will head to bed too." The children knew they would only distract Roxanne from her work if they stayed longer. Therefore, they obediently heeded her words and left the study. Soon, the room was silent again. Glancing at the coffee and cake, Roxanne felt a surge of warmth enveloping her. She spent some time reading the documents before realizing it was getting late. Since she felt prepared, she got up and decided to get some rest. When she stepped out of the study, she noticed two heads shrinking back from the open bedroom door. At the sight of that, Roxanne could not hold back her laughter. She headed to their bedroom and questioned, "Why aren't both of you sleeping?" Immediately, the two children embraced her and coyly whined, "We wanted to keep an eye on you. If you stayed up late, it would not be good for you. Therefore, we were just about to ask you to have an early night." Their thoughtfulness melted Roxanne's heart, and she caressed the boys' heads. After she tucked them into bed, she headed back to her bedroom. She felt excited yet nervous about the medical consultation the next day. After bidding her children goodbye, Roxanne drove to the location where the medical consultation would take place. The event was scheduled to start at 10 in the morning. Afraid of being late, Roxanne left the house at 8. Since her return to Horrington, she had spent most of her time in the city. Hence, she was rather unfamiliar with the roads on the outskirts. Although she turned on her navigator, she still took several detours. When she finally reached the orphanage, more than a few cars were already parked outside. "Looks like I arrived later than expected." Slightly exasperated, Roxanne furrowed her brows. She grabbed her recommendation letter before quickly getting out of her car and heading to the entrance. There was a queue outside consisting of doctors from different parts of the country with letters of recommendation, and almost all of them were middle-aged men. When it was Roxanne's turn, the man in charge took a glimpse of her and politely reminded her, "Miss, are you at the wrong place?" Luckily, she managed to calm herself and fall asleep quickly. The next day, Roxanne woke up on time. As soon as she opened the door, she saw two small figures standing outside her room. The two boys wore white shirts and black slacks with suspenders. With their hair slicked back, they looked like little princes. Tilting their head up, they greeted Roxanne energetically, "Good morning, Mommy." Taking in her children's appearance, Roxanne felt her mood lifting, and the pressure she had felt before seemed to have disappeared. She took the two children down for breakfast, and they lovingly filled her plate with food. Before she left, they did not forget to cheer her on. Roxanne thought it was funny but heartwarming at the same time. The Damaris family has organized a medical consultation here. "Are you sure you are?" Hearing that, Roxanne was taken aback. She then interrupted him. "I know. I'm here to take part in it." The man suspiciously stared at her and thought it did not seem right. Previously, the people who entered were all middle-aged men. Most of them seemed to have the same refined and mellow personality. Roxanne was neither middle-aged nor a male. As such, she was different from the rest. Compared to the rest, she stood out like a sore thumb. To the man in charge of the registration, she seemed more like an actress coming for a shoot than a doctor seeking to participate in a free medical consultation for children. The other doctors lining up also looked at Roxanne in confusion, thinking she was there to cause trouble. At that moment, Roxanne took the recommendation letter from Alfred out of her bag. She passed it to the man and stated, "Here is my recommendation letter. Please have a look at it." The man skeptically took her letter and opened it. He glanced through it before looking at Roxanne in surprise. After a moment, he snapped back to his senses, moved aside, and bowed to Roxanne. "Dr. Jarvis, I apologize for my rudeness. I thought you were an actress coming here to film." Roxanne simply pursed her lips and smiled without saying anything. Although there was a misunderstanding, she had to admit people from the Damaris family were well-mannered. Even though he thought she had come to the wrong place, he did not treat her with disrespect. As such, Roxanne did not take it to heart. "Please come in. There will be someone inside who will lead you to Mr. Damaris." The man gestured for her to enter. Roxanne politely thanked him and took her recommendation letter with her inside. The Damaris family had transformed the orphanage. They had built cubicles in the courtyard, and people were already waiting in them, appearing to have been sent over by the Damaris family to aid the doctors. Meanwhile, children were leaning against the windows, looking out curiously at the courtyard. Roxanne turned to those children and instantly felt her heart melt for them. Naturally, she gave them a warm smile. It was the first time those children had seen someone as pretty as Roxanne. Seeing her beautiful smile, the children could not help but blush. At the same time, one of the workers there came to greet Roxanne. Like the man at the door, the next employee was surprised to see Roxanne. Subconsciously, he looked behind her to see if there was a camera somewhere. Roxanne politely smiled and automatically passed him her recommendation letter. "Hello. Old Mr. Queen recommended I join the medical consultation. Earlier, your colleague told me someone would bring me to Mr. Damaris. Please lead the way." When the employee heard that, he suspiciously took her letter. After confirming her identity, he turned to bring her further into the building. Along the way, Roxanne expected to see many doctors there. After all, many had queued up outside earlier. On the contrary, she did not meet many people, which seemed strange. When they arrived in front of the director's office, Larry coincidentally came out from it. Upon spotting Roxanne, he chuckled and waved to her. "Did you just arrive?" Roxanne nodded. She wanted to share what had happened earlier. However, here was no time to tell him about it. "Mr. Damaris is waiting inside, and you should head in soon. This year, not many prestigious families recommended others here. It might only be us two," Larry stated. Roxanne was slightly confused by his words. She did not understand how that made a difference. Before she could ask more, the employee knocked on the office door and invited her in. Quickly, Roxanne had to calm herself and prepare to head inside. The moment she entered the door, she spotted a skinny young man. Perhaps because of how thin he was, his features were more prominent. "Mr. Damaris, this is Dr. Jarvis. The Queen family recommended her," the employee introduced. The man slowly looked up at Roxanne. When she met his gaze, Roxanne respectfully introduced herself. "Hello, the Queen family recommended me to participate in this medical consultation. My name is Roxanne Jarvis." The man eyed her. Over the last few years, the Damaris family would typically accept doctors recommended by prestigious families to participate in medical consultations organized by them. It was no exception this year. To show his respect, he would meet each of them in person. The doctors endorsed by prestigious families were usually members of those families. Most of them had already made a name for themselves in the traditional medicine scene as well. However, the woman before him, recommended by the Queen family, was different. She was not from the Queen family. And Jack had never even heard of her name. He only knew she had treated Alfred. Jack had asked Larry about her earlier and understood that she was Harvey's student. Despite having some knowledge about her, he did not expect Roxanne to be a young and beautiful woman. As he scrutinized her, Roxanne could not help but feel nervous. Even so, she stood there with confidence. After some time, the man looked away and curled his lips into a smile. He stretched out his hand and welcomed her. "I have heard much about you. My name is Jack Damaris, and I'm the person in charge of the medical consultation this time." Roxanne reached out to shake hands with him. Somehow, Jack seemed cold when he did not speak. However, once he opened his mouth, he seemed like a warm person. Roxanne could not help but think about the man who welcomed her at the door and attributed it to the Damaris family's good upbringing. As for Jack, she had heard of him before. Over the past few days, Roxanne had read up on the Damaris family while studying for the medical consultation. She knew that Jack was Hector's grandson and also the best doctor from the Damaris family's youngest generation. As the Damaris family had been keeping a low profile in recent years, Jack rarely showed up in front of the public, and it made him seem mysterious. When she was going through that information, Roxanne could not help but wonder what kind of a person he was. Now, she could finally put a face to the person she had read about. "I heard you used traditional medicine to treat old Mr. Queen's condition," Jack said in a low voice. Nodding, Roxanne explained, "According to my judgment, using traditional medicine was more suitable in treating old Mr. Queen's condition. It would also work faster." Then, she looked up to see Jack's reaction. It seemed like he wanted her to continue. Therefore, Roxanne recounted her journey in treating Alfred's illness. Jack raised his brows while hearing her speak. He was surprised by how composed the young lady was when she talked about Alfred's condition. In addition, he had to admit that she made sense. When Alfred was severely ill, the Damaris family sent quite a few people to help him get back in shape. However, as he was quite weak, they did not dare to use overly drastic measures. Once Alfred told her of his condition, Roxanne inserted each needle in his critical points before managing to save him. After hearing Roxanne's analysis, Jack could not help but ask, "Considering old Mr. Queen's health back then, what reason did you have to decide on such an acupuncture method?" Roxanne was stunned for a while. Back then, she had taken a huge risk. If she explained it to Jack like that, he might not believe her. After all, her method was too risky. Upon that thought, Roxanne hesitated for a moment before explaining, "I chanced upon it in a medical book. Coincidentally, old Mr. Queen's condition matched what was described there, so I wanted to give it a try." Jack nodded in understanding, not suspecting her words at all. It was true that Harvey had a few precious books. Since Roxanne was his disciple, it was not strange that she would have read those books. Furthermore, Roxanne was still very young. Jack did not believe that her medical skills would be extremely advanced. "Luckily, you thought of that idea. Otherwise, he wouldn't have recovered so quickly," said Jack politely with a smile. Roxanne responded with a humble smile. They chatted for a while. Jack's polite attitude caused Roxanne to let her guard down slowly. Initially, she assumed that Jack would be arrogant because he was from the Damaris family. To her surprise, the Damaris family had remarkable upbringing methods, and he was very humble. Seems like our cooperation will be very smooth in the future. A staff knocked on the door and entered. Mr. Damaris, the hospital is already prepared. The kids are waiting. When Jack heard that, a serious expression crossed his face. It's almost time. Dr. Jarvis, let's change our clothes and prepare. Roxanne nodded before following the staff to change her clothes. When she walked out of the changing room, she bumped into Larry again. Although she had already mentally prepared herself, she could not help but feel nervous now that the medical consultation was about to start. When she saw a familiar face, her anxiety dissipated slightly. Smiling, she greeted him, "Larry." Larry returned her smile and patted her shoulder. "Don't be nervous. Just treat it as a normal consultation with a kid. With your skills, there should be no problems." Roxanne smiled. As they spoke, Jack also walked over after changing his clothes. "Are you ready? Let's go." As they were about to start work, Jack looked very serious. His stern aura returned to him. Roxanne was stunned for a while before shooting a look at Larry instinctively. Larry smiled. "He knows that we are acquaintances. In fact, he even asked me about you earlier. I'm sorry that your efforts went to waste." By saying that, he was referring to how Roxanne chose to come alone in order to avoid any suspicions. Since Jack already knew that she was acquainted with Larry, Roxanne felt calmer. She nodded at Larry before walking out together with the other man. Only a few minutes had passed, but there was now a lot more equipment in the courtyard compared to when she first arrived. Roxanne scanned the place. Although the Damaris family was a prestigious family in the traditional medicine field, there were quite a few pieces of modern medical equipment placed in the courtyard. This was to make it easier to treat the children. The doctors who were queuing up earlier had already entered their own cubicles. Smiling amiably, they looked at the children waiting to enter. Everything looked very formal. Roxanne walked into her cubicle briskly. There was already another doctor waiting there. When he saw that she was just a young woman, he thought that she was merely a useless person whom the family had recommended. Hence, he ignored her. Larry followed her in. There were 2 to 3 doctors in each cubicle, as well as someone from the Damaris family. Their cubicle was the most well-equipped out of all the cubicles. There were 2 doctors recommended by the prestigious family and a famous traditional medicine doctor. Even Jack was accompanying them personally. When Larry entered, Daniel Hop's expression changed. Smiling, he welcomed Larry. "Mr. Morrison, it's been a long time." Larry nodded calmly. "Long time no see, Dr. Hop." Daniel grinned at him in a flattering manner. He kept following behind Larry and showering him with care. However, he ignored Roxanne completely. Roxanne did not mind his coldness. Instead, she focused on checking all the equipment. Then, she nodded at Jack, who was standing at the entrance, signaling that she was ready. All the equipment they were using today had been customized by the Damaris family. Hence, the family members waiting in the cubicles were meant to introduce the equipment to the doctors. Jack was supposed to guide Roxanne and Larry personally. Jack had just returned after checking up on the others. When he entered to explain the equipment to Roxanne, he realized that she had already finished all the checks skillfully. As if she had used the equipment multiple times before. Evidently, Roxanne had prepared well before coming. A flash of surprise appeared in Jack's eyes as he wondered how Roxanne had discovered these secrets. However, he gave it further thought and remembered that Roxanne was not only recommended by Alfred but was also Harvey's student. It was not surprising that she knew the Damaris family's matters. Even so, it was rare that someone would spend so much effort for this medical consultation. Do you know how to use all these? Intrigued by Roxanne's performance, Jack walked over. When Jack entered, Daniel wanted to greet him as well. However, Jack merely nodded at him politely before directing his gaze to Roxanne. Roxanne nodded humbly. I read up on them before coming. However, since it's my first time using them, I don't know if I might have made any mistakes. Please explain them to me again, Dr. Damaris. Jack gazed at her broodingly before explaining. He spoke slowly so she would understand. Roxanne listened attentively at the side and asked some meticulous questions occasionally. She had been amazed when she read about the equipment the Damaris family had invented. After listening to Jack introduce them personally, she felt a greater urge to familiarize herself with them. Looking at how curious she was, Jack maintained his patience and answered all of her questions. Larry was listening attentively too. However, Daniel was very distracted. When he saw how nicely Jack was treating Roxanne, his expression changed gradually. His initial indifference morphed into indignance. That woman obviously doesn't know anything. How dare she keep asking Mr. Damaris these questions? It's even more frustrating how patient he is with her. The only possibility Daniel could think of was that Roxanne had a powerful background. Otherwise, Jack would not have treated her so differently. Even though he had so much experience, Jack did not even spare him another glance. On the other hand, Roxanne was so engrossed in Jack's explanation that she did not even notice Daniel staring at her. After Jack was finally done explaining, the cubicle became quiet again. Daniel immediately approached Jack and asked, Mr. Damaris, when will the medical consultation start? Jack glanced at the time and replied, soon. Please wait for a moment. We are preparing outside. Daniel nodded. Shooting Roxanne a weird look, he asked Jack, we've got a serious responsibility here. Why don't we bring a few more doctors from another cubicle over? When Roxanne and the rest heard him, they glanced at him in confusion, not knowing why he would suggest that. Jack asked directly, why? Do you think that you will be too busy, Dr. Hop? Daniel shook his hands. If there are 4 doctors here, we'd definitely have enough people. But now, I'm afraid that the check UPS for the kids will not be meticulous enough, and some mistakes might happen. As Daniel spoke, he deliberately glanced at Roxanne. In other words, he was suggesting that she was not professional enough. Only then did Roxanne realize that Daniel was not satisfied with her. She could not help but feel confused. I don't even know him, yet he's being so hostile toward me. She normally did not mind people doubting her medical skills. However, on this special occasion, she felt uncomfortable. Jack followed the direction of Daniel's gaze and glanced at Roxanne. However, he quickly averted his gaze and said coldly, "Dr. Hop, are you saying that someone's skills here aren't up to par?" Although Daniel merely smiled without saying anything, he was implicitly affirming what Jack said. At that, Jack raised his eyebrows and looked at Roxanne. While he also doubted Roxanne's medical skills, he believed that Alfred and Harvey would not recommend an incapable traditional medicine doctor to him. Still, he would not defend her based on this teeny bit of trust alone. Observing this ridiculous scene from the side, Larry frowned. "Dr. Hop, we are all doctors. At this critical juncture, please don't affect other people's moods. It'll soon become clear whose skills aren't up to par." Daniel did not expect Larry to speak up on behalf of Roxanne. A flash of surprise appeared in his eyes as he stared at the three of them suspiciously. It was obvious what he was thinking. A grim look flashed across the three people's faces simultaneously. Jack frowned. However, out of concern for the Damaris family's reputation, he did not reveal any fury. Unable to stand it, Roxanne strode toward Daniel and said coldly, "Dr. Hop, we don't know each other at all. But since you're older than me, I can understand if you doubt my medical skills. However, you're crossing the line by misunderstanding me like that." Daniel did not expect Roxanne to be so aggressive. Even though he wanted to rebuke her, he decided against it and remained silent. "Regarding the concerns you raised earlier, I can tell you very clearly that I won't be a burden to anyone. If I display a single unprofessional act, you can raise it up with me anytime. I'll leave on my own. The medical consultations target children. I won't joke around with children's lives." Roxanne stood in front of Daniel with a serious expression. Daniel's agitation dissipated slightly. He sounded quite hesitant when he said, "Since you've already said that, if anything wrong happens later." Before he could finish his sentence, Larry's gentle voice sounded in the cubicle. "If anything goes wrong, I'll settle it for her. You just need to mind yourself, Dr. Hop." When Daniel heard Larry's words, he completely lost all anger. Although he kept quiet timidly, he still could not help but look down on Roxanne. He was one of the top doctors in Chennara's traditional medicine scene. Other than those from a few prestigious families, any other traditional medicine doctor would treat him with the utmost respect. He also knew the other famous traditional medicine doctors in Chennai. However, he had no idea who Roxanne was. It was evident that she was no one spectacular. If she didn't have Mr. Morrison and Mr. Damaris backing her up, she wouldn't have dared to speak to me like that. Looking at how Daniel had relented, Larry turned back and nodded at Roxanne to reassure her. Roxanne said gratefully, "Thank you, Larry. Don't worry, I'm doing great now." Initially, she was quite nervous. However, due to Daniel's provocation, her anxiety had now been replaced with fury. All she wanted to do was to prove herself to Daniel and erase his prejudice toward her. Ari heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that she was not affected. On the other hand, Jack stared at them with a thoughtful look. After meeting Larry in the office earlier, he already knew that they were acquainted. However, he did not expect them to be so close. A temporary silence befell the cubicle. Then, a commotion sounded from the door before a staff reminded, "Mr. Damaris, the medical consultation has begun. The children are here." When they heard that, they immediately went into work mode. They changed their expressions and looked at the cubicle door with a smile. 4 adorable children entered in a line. 9 When they saw the 4 adults in the room, they could not help but blush. Although Daniel was a middle-aged man with a beer belly, the other 3 were exceptionally good-looking. Despite the amiable smiles on the adults' faces, the kids felt shy. They stood at the entrance and hesitated to enter. Jack was quite experienced with these sorts of situations. Just when he was about to go forward to bring them in, Roxanne had already gone over. "Hello." Smiling, Roxanne squatted in front of the kids and stroked their heads affectionately. When she approached them, the kids became even shyer. Blushing, they tried to retreat. However, Roxanne produced some sweets out of nowhere, placed them in her palm, and showed them to the kids. She said gently, "This sweet is delicious. Would you like to try it?" The kids had no immunity to sweets. They stared at Roxanne's palm eagerly. However, still smiling, she withdrew her hand. She stood up and extended an empty hand to a girl. "Come here. After I give you a checkup, I'll let you eat some sweets." The girl stared at her timidly, thinking that Roxanne was not only pretty but also smelled fragrant. Gazing at her with a smile, Roxanne looked like she was shining brightly. When Roxanne noticed the look on the child's face, she could not help but remember how Estella was similarly scared when they first met. Upon that thought, the look on Roxanne's face became gentler as she looked at the kid patiently. After a while, the girl extended her hand carefully and grabbed one of Roxanne's fingers. Heaving a sigh of relief, Roxanne brought the kid over to a bed and told her to lie on. The remaining 3 kids subconsciously wanted to follow her there. However, when the 3 men blocked the way, they cowered nervously. Roxanne turned her head around and glanced at them. Shaking her head exasperatedly, she told them, "You don't have to get a checkup from me specifically. If you let them give you a checkup, I'll still give you sweets." When the kids heard that, they hesitated for a while before lying on the other 3 beds. Upon this thought, Daniel wiped off the sweat on his forehead and gritted his teeth as he approached the bed, checking on the little boy's pulse. Before anyone was able to react, Daniel had already retrieved his acupuncture tools from the side and started sanitizing them. Seeing this, worry shrouded Roxanne, leading her to ask, "Dr. Hop, do you know how to treat the little one?" Her question had the already impatient Daniel becoming even more irritated as soon as he heard her voice. "It's not like I planned to frighten the little boy earlier. This all happened because of this woman. If she had not been so slow and wasted everyone's time, we wouldn't be in this situation now. Even if I don't, it's not like you would know." Daniel turned around and glanced at her unhappily before returning to sanitizing his tools. On the other hand, the sense of unease in Roxanne only deepened when she caught the irritation on his face. Standing right beside her were Larry and Jack. Just like Roxanne, both of them were also very skeptical about this, causing them to ask seriously, "So, according to your diagnosis, what is happening to the boy?" Daniel's expression froze up instantly for a split second upon being questioned. But he replied stiffly, "Regardless, whatever it is, we should stop the pain for him immediately. Can't you see that he's in so much pain?" With that said, he picked up the silver needles and prepared to give Jamie an acupuncture session. Larry and Jack, 100, did not voice any objections to Daniel's decision. After all, the little boy's pain was visibly horrifying, so helping him by stopping the pain first was entirely appropriate. They were too blinded by their worry for the boy that they forgot about the basics. On the other hand, Roxanne's heart tightened once more as soon as she saw the acupuncture point Daniel was aiming at. Out of instinct, she hurriedly stopped him. "Wait! Not on that acupuncture point!" Her shouting immediately attracted the attention of the other three. Daniel became even more annoyed this time, and he said, "If you don't know what is going on, then you should stop kicking up a fuss, Dr. Jarvis. This is the most basic acupuncture point that is known for easing pain. Don't tell me you don't even know about this." Upon seeing that, the four adults in the room felt their hearts sinking. As for Daniel, he was so shocked that he hurriedly let go of the little one he was holding before rushing forward. The child on the ground had clearly been startled by his earlier action, and that caused the boy to be struck with a violent seizure. According to their diagnosis, the child had a strange condition where startling him would cause a vigorous chain reaction that would put him in great pain. It was their first time encountering such a case. Daniel had merely been trying to change a method to speed up the medical consultation's progress. He never expected he would startle the boy. Seeing how the pain was torturing the little child, the expressions of the four adults became grim. Roxanne was the first among them to react. She forcefully suppressed the panic in her as she got up and dispersed the children around Jamie. "Please don't be afraid. We will now help Jamie to get better. In the meantime, why don't you all head outside first?" The kids, however, surrounded Jamie as they refused to leave. One of the little girls then said with a voice choked with sobs, "Jamie." Jamie would act like this sometimes, but he would recover by himself after a while. "We'll wait here until he gets better." Hearing this, Roxanne felt a stinging pain in her heart. I wonder how little Jamie endured this horrifying pain back then all by himself. The rest of the kids showed great determination about staying back with Jamie, leaving Roxanne with no choice but to turn around to seek help from Larry. Instantly understanding her intention, Larry carefully lifted the boy from the ground before putting him on the bed. At this point, the little boy was already in so much pain that he was almost unconscious. A moment ago, the pain had him curled up in a fatal position, yet at this second, he couldn't even clench his hands anymore as he lay there limply with his face facing upward. Unfortunately, there was nothing the four of them could do. All they could do was watch. This was because they had yet to properly study the little boy's condition, but now was not the time to hesitate. There was even cold sweat all over Daniel's forehead now. After all, his reckless action was the sole reason that put the boy in this situation. If anything horrible happened to the little boy, his reputation would be destroyed in an instant. Upon this thought, Daniel wiped off the sweat on his forehead and gritted his teeth as he approached the bed, checking on the little boy's pulse. Before anyone was able to react, Daniel had already retrieved his acupuncture tools from the side and started sanitizing them. Seeing this, worry shrouded Roxanne, leading her to ask, "Dr. Hop, do you know how to treat the little one?" Her question had the already impatient Daniel becoming even more irritated as soon as he heard her voice. "T's not like I planned to frighten the little boy earlier. This all happened because of this woman. If she had not been so slow and wasted everyone's time, we wouldn't be in this situation now. Even if I don't, it's not like you would know." Daniel turned around and glanced at her unhappily before returning to sanitizing his tools. On the other hand, the sense of unease in Roxanne only deepened when she caught the irritation on his face. Standing right beside her were Larry and Jack. Just like Roxanne, both of them were also very skeptical about this, causing them to ask seriously. "So, according to your diagnosis, what is happening to the boy?" Daniel's expression froze up instantly for a split second upon being questioned. But he replied stiffly, "Regardless, whatever it is, we should stop the pain for him immediately. Can't you see that he's in so much pain?" With that said, he picked up the silver needles and prepared to give Jamie an acupuncture session. Larry and Jack, 100, did not voice any objections to Daniel's decision. After all, the little boy's pain was visibly horrifying, so helping him by stopping the pain first was entirely appropriate. They were too blinded by their worry for the boy that they forgot about the basics. On the other hand, Roxanne's heart tightened once more as soon as she saw the acupuncture point Daniel was aiming at. Out of instinct, she hurriedly stopped him. "Wait! Not on that acupuncture point!" Her shouting immediately attracted the attention of the other three. Daniel became even more annoyed this time, and he said, "If you don't know what is going on, then you should stop kicking up a fuss, Dr. Jarvis. This is the most basic acupuncture point that is known for easing pain. Don't tell me you don't even know about this." In truth, Roxanne had not given it much thought before she blurted out her words. He merely felt that the particular acupuncture point was not the right one, and her heart pumped quickly. However, upon being questioned by Daniel, Roxanne gradually calmed herself down, and countless analyses flashed through her mind. A moment later, she walked toward Daniel and patiently explained, "This is indeed the most basic acupuncture point for pain relief, but I'm also crystal clear that we should consider the patient's body condition before we do anything. Whatever the condition, the acupuncture points will always be the same." Daniel frowned, visibly impatient. With that said, he immediately tried to stab the needle into the boy. His action, however, was quickly stopped by Roxanne as she grabbed onto his wrist, preventing him from inserting the silver needle into the acupuncture point. This is indeed the best acupuncture point, but it only works on a patient that is well aware and prepared for what is coming. Jamie is still too young, and he is too weak for this. Besides, his tenseness will not let him receive this treatment method properly. If we recklessly use the silver needle on this point, he might become paralyzed if something goes wrong. We can't risk it with a kid. If we're just going to stop the pain, let me do it. I know a way that is much gentler than this." Her words had Larry and Jack exchanging a glance with each other before they nodded approvingly. Daniel, however, retained the same mentality. Instead of listening to Roxanne, he scornfully looked at her and said, "Oh, that's strange. I've been a traditional medicine practitioner for years, and this is the first time I've heard of another method to relieve pain. I wonder where you got this knowledge from, Dr. Jarvis? You're telling me not to take risks with a child. But to me, you're the one that is using them as subjects of your experiment. Look at the pain this boy is in. Now step aside. The young lady, however, stubbornly remained standing in front of Jamie. As a staring contest ensued between the two, Jack interfered and said, "Let Dr. Jarvis try her method." Just like Daniel, he, too, had never heard of another acupuncture point that could help to relieve pain. His mind, however, changed after he recalled that Roxanne had used a method he had never heard of to treat Alfred. Hence, his sixth sense had him convinced that perhaps they could believe in Roxanne for once. Jack's words immediately caused Daniel's face to turn red. A moment later, despite being extremely unwilling, Daniel still put the silver needles down and made space for Roxanne. After that, the trio locked their eyes on Roxanne. With a deep breath, Roxanne calmed herself down before picking up the silver needles and inserting them onto the acupuncture points according to what she remembered. She had seen this method in one of Harvey's ancient medicine journals, and this was the very first time she used it to relieve pain. At this point, all she could do was pray hard that the method would work. Little did she know that the calm demeanor and accuracy she displayed while giving the acupuncture session had Larry and the others thinking that she was more than just confident. Aside from that, her skill had also impressed them greatly. Yet, even after she was done with the acupuncture session, it seemed to have no effect as Jamie showed no response. Roxanne gently wiped off the sweat on her forehead and replied softly, "This is a method I learned from an ancient medicine journal. Due to the milder nature of the method, it will take some time for the effect to kick in." Hearing this, everyone around her relaxed. Though Daniel was still skeptical, it was quickly discarded after seeing the little boy opening his eyes. The pain haunting the boy was no longer visible as well. The other children also stopped crying after seeing Jamie return to his senses. In an instant, they surrounded the bed joyfully. "Jamie, how are you feeling now?" The little girl who had alerted Roxanne to Jamie's condition earlier looked at the boy concernedly. Jamie frowned for a second before he happily shouted, "The pain. It's gone. I used to feel sore all over my body whenever I recovered, but I'm feeling okay right now." Upon hearing that, Roxanne finally felt at ease. Heart aching, she patted the little boy's head and said, "I'll prescribe you some medicine. Make sure to take them accordingly, and you will no longer be in pain anymore." Jamie nodded happily to her words. "Dr. Jarvis, you are indeed a student of Harvey Lambert. Those are some impressive skills you showed us." Jack praised with a smile as he finally let go of his prejudice toward Roxanne. Roxanne smiled humbly in response. Standing right beside her was Daniel. Unlike the others, he stood there with an ugly expression, for he felt humiliated by what happened. While Roxanne was treating the kid, the news of what was going on in their cubicle had spread to the others. Many doctors were surprised to hear that Roxanne actually questioned Daniel's capability. They also became curious when they heard about how she said there was an alternative acupuncture point that could stop the pain. All of them put their work aside and made their way there. The second they got into the room, they saw Roxanne administering the treatment. They judged her by her appearance and didn't trust her skills. However, they understood how important it was to stay focused when administering treatment, so they stood there quietly. When they saw that Roxanne's treatment was actually working, they gasped in astonishment. The acupuncture technique involved was something they had never even heard about. Yet, it was obvious that her technique was more ancient than theirs. No one knew where she could have learned that. They couldn't help applauding when they heard Jack complimenting her. The sudden clapping stunned Roxanne momentarily. She turned around and realized that a number of doctors had gathered by the door. Every single one of them seemed more experienced than she was. For a moment there, Roxanne was lost. Is that Dr. Lambert's apprentice? No wonder she is so skilled. We truly learned something today. Dr. Jarvis, let's hang out sometime when we're free. I'd like to know more about your unique acupuncture techniques. Everyone praised her. The distrust they felt earlier had since turned into admiration. Hearing their praise made Roxanne grin humbly. Thank you for the compliments. There is so much more I still have to learn. I'll be counting on you, my seniors, to guide me. Test when they were queuing up at the entrance of the orphanage earlier, many had stared strangely at her. Roxanne simply wanted to do her job. The thought of showing off and impressing them had never even crossed her mind. Oh, her surprise! That was exactly what had happened, and everyone's opinion of her had shifted. She was young and beautiful. On top of that, she was a skilled medical practitioner and a humble person. That made everyone admire her even more. In an instant, the atmosphere in the room turned peaceful and warm. Daniel, however, stood off to the side with a gloomy expression, looking like the odd one out. Out of nowhere, someone shifted everybody's attention to Daniel. Dr. Hop, you were too impulsive earlier. Shouldn't you apologize to Dr. Jarvis and the kid for it? Everyone simultaneously turned their gaze to Daniel. It seemed that Daniel wasn't just famous for being one of the best traditional medicine practitioners in Chania. He was also notoriously arrogant. Many doctors on site had long held a grudge against him. Now that the opportunity to embarrass him had presented itself, they seized it. Daniel felt as though he were being roasted on a spit when he sensed everybody's gaze landing on him. He looked terrible and was stiff when he turned his attention to Roxanne. Even he had to admit that he had behaved a little poorly earlier. Still, asking him to publicly apologize to a younger, less experienced doctor was too embarrassing, and he couldn't do it. Hesitation rose within Roxanne's heart when she saw Daniel staring like that, but in the end, she didn't comment on it. All she wanted was for the medical consultations to go well. Roxanne stayed true to the core beliefs of the Damaris family's medical consultation and her personal objective for participating in it. Hence, she didn't want anything unpleasant to happen. Daniel waited for quite some time, but Roxanne never softened her stance. That left him with no choice. Embarrassed, his face reddened. I only behaved poorly because I was too worried and wanted to treat the kid as soon as possible. My heart was in the right place. Everyone frowned in unison when they heard that. Roxanne's grin slowly faded, and her discontentment rose. That was when a little girl's voice broke the silence and eased the tension. This is all your fault. You grabbed Leslie and frightened Jamie, complained the little girl angrily while pointing at Daniel. She was the oldest among the kids and had always been the one to take care of them. In other words, she was like a big sister to everyone, and all she wanted at that moment was to get justice for the younger ones. Daniel's eyes bulged. He was furious to hear what the girl said. If no one else were around, he would beat the kid up and teach her manners right then and there. Dr. Hop, I can't deny that you are a great man who has accomplished much, but mistakes happen. You were wrong and should apologize accordingly. Aide Jack while frowning at Daniel. The former didn't want to waste time on that matter. She had never planned on holding a grudge against Daniel for questioning her skills earlier, however. Now that someone had pointed it out, she couldn't help thinking about how Daniel had let his emotions get the best of him and almost crippled a kid. She didn't care about what happened to her, but she couldn't forgive Daniel for what he almost did to the boy. Jack's instruction caused Daniel to stiffen. Given the power that the Damaris family held, the good doctor had no choice but to force an ugly smile on his face and turn his attention to Roxanne. I was too impulsive earlier, Dr. Jarvis, and neglected to take the kid's weakened state into consideration. However, please trust that my actions only came from my concern, and please forgive me for that. Naturally, Roxanne could tell just how reluctant he was to say those words. She didn't care, though. She simply grinned at Daniel and said, I believe your intentions are pure, and I understand that you were in a tough position. The acupuncture point you aimed for is commonly known as the only one to stop pain. So I'm sure anyone else would do the same if put in your position. However, I am not the person you should apologize to. It's them you should apologize to. After saying that, Roxanne moved to the side and revealed the kids hanging out beside the bed. Their faces were still wet from the tears they shed earlier. Due to what happened to Jamie, the other kids were so worried that they forgot all about wiping their tears away. Everyone surrounded the bed with damp cheeks. Many doctors present were parents, and seeing those teary eyes stung their hearts, making them ache so much that they couldn't even speak. Daniel stared at the kids in dissatisfaction, then turned to Jack, who was at the side. The latter was frowning and staring pointedly at the former. Obviously, he agreed with what Roxanne had said. Daniel had no choice. He had to lower his stance and crouched down to face the kids. Trying to sound as sincere as possible, he said, I am so sorry, kids. I was too worried earlier and frightened you. The truth is that I just wanted everyone to behave so I could cure you quickly. The little girl stared for a few seconds before turning her attention to the two kids who were frightened earlier. They nodded slowly. She wouldn't even look at Daniel until the kids had forgiven him. Okay, then we will forgive you for it, but you must never scare us like that again. Jamie can't handle it. Daniel forced another smile on his face and turned to face the crowd. It was almost as though he was telling them to back off now that he had apologized. Everyone could tell that he wasn't sincere, but it was already significant progress for him, so no one complained. Ak spoke up once more to put an end to everything. Now that the issue is settled, please return to your stations. The kids are waiting for your treatment. Please also take this as a lesson. We must be patient with kids. The crowd murmured affirmatively before returning to their cubicles. Once again, only the four of them were left in their cubicle. Roxanne turned around to see how the kids were doing. Sweetly, she asked, See, kids? The treatment isn't scary at all, right? As soon as she finished speaking, Jamie, who had just received treatment, raised his hand and answered, It's true. It doesn't hurt at all, and I feel so much better now. The little girl had initially been a bit reluctant to receive treatment, but seeing Roxanne's attitude toward them made her feel more comfortable. Jamie's words put her at ease as well. "You're right. It's nothing to be scared of. Sorry for backing away earlier, miss." The other kids nodded in agreement. Roxanne's heart melted when she saw that. She crouched down to stroke their tiny heads. "Everybody is doing great. I'm glad you're not scared anymore. Believe in us, okay? We will make sure that everybody will grow up happy and healthy." The kids nodded obediently. "Okay, who's next?" asked Roxanne as she stood up and pointed at the bed. It didn't take long before a little boy stepped out from the crowd and climbed onto the bed. That was the same boy who cried earlier when Daniel grabbed his arm. Seeing all that made Daniel feel even worse. Roxanne smiled warmly at the kid and had him lie down nicely before she checked his pulse. The rest of the kids circled her, making it as though the other 3 doctors were invisible. When Larry noticed that, he smiled in exasperation and cleared his throat. He reminded, "Kids, we are doctors as well and can cure you, too. Don't play favorites, okay?" One of the kids heard what he said and glanced over before turning back to Roxanne. Clearly, the kids preferred Roxanne. Larry shook his head in exasperation and turned his attention to Jack, who was standing at the side. All 4 doctors were stationed there, so it was not right to have Roxanne do all the work alone. Worse still, there were too many children, and Roxanne would not be able to treat all of them, even if she were to work till night. The recent events surrounding Roxanne had resulted in her capturing Jack's full attention. His initial distrust toward her had changed to admiration, and now, an additional hint of respect had been added. He could tell that Roxanne's heart was in the right place. She genuinely cared about the kids, and that was why she participated in the medical consultation. It was also why the kids were especially attached to her. Some of the kids were shy and refused to go to the other doctors, so there was a perpetual long queue near Roxanne. Even after taking care of so many patients consecutively, Roxanne wasn't irritated or tired at all. She even managed to stop Daniel in time to prevent him from making the wrong decision. All that work didn't eat away her patience, and she remained kind to the kids. That quality was incredible, especially when found in a young doctor. Meanwhile, Daniel was still upset with the earlier incident and was hoping Roxanne would get in trouble. He prayed that she would be forced to take care of all the kids, and seeing how they surrounded her made him grin. He wanted to see her get worn out. At that point, he no longer cared if they could get the job done that day. Emotionally worn out, Larry sighed. He saw how the other 2 doctors were staring at Roxanne and were patiently waiting for Roxanne to finish up with Leslie's treatment. In a kind tone, he requested, "Roxanne, send some kids to us, will you? It's empty here, and those unaware of the situation might assume that we are here as observing interns. It's so embarrassing, and we won't be able to finish our task today if the situation remains this way." Roxanne tilted her head down and saw the kids surrounding her. They had heard what Larry said earlier, but they were still a little scared. If possible, she wanted to treat the kids in person as well, but she had to stick to the schedule for the day. Being responsible for curing all the kids would mean that she likely wouldn't be able to finish today, even if she worked all night. She was still heartbroken, but seeing the bigger picture encouraged her to coax the kids sweetly, "The doctors there can cure you too, little ones. They're nice. Remember how kind they were during the checkup." The kids turned to one another after hearing what Roxanne said, but no one wanted to take the first step forward. Roxanne couldn't help feeling a little defeated when she saw their reaction. "If you insist on waiting for me, then some will not be treated today, and that is not ideal. I really hope that everyone can get their treatment today." Hesitation engulfed the kids once more. Just as Roxanne was struggling to find the words to convince them, the little girl, who was the leader, stepped forward. She obediently made her way to Larry's side and requested, "Please be gentle." Larry smiled warmly at her and stroked her head. "Got it. Thank you for trusting me." The girl smiled sweetly. Now that someone had taken the first step, more and more kids began leaving Roxanne's side. They went to the other doctors. Daniel was the only one left with absolutely no patient. The kids might have claimed to have forgiven him, but they were still terrified of him, especially since he had a scowl on. Daniel was even more infuriated when he saw how the kids were actively avoiding him. He had been a traditional medicine practitioner for years, and that was the first time he wasn't coveted. There was no way he would ask Roxanne for help after what had happened earlier, so he had no choice but to stand there stiffly. Quite a few kids were still hanging out around Roxanne. She turned around and saw that Daniel was the only one without any patience, and that made her frown. Hesitation rose within her. It was clear that the kids still feared him, but if no one went to him, the team's efficiency would remain low. Roxanne hesitated for a few moments before curving her lips into a smile. "You can go to the good doctor there as well. He was only scary earlier because he was eager to cure everybody. Now that he has learned his lesson, will you give him a chance to redeem himself? He's very skilled and can cure you quickly." After that, Roxanne shifted her gaze and smiled at Daniel, signaling him to do something. Daniel was taken aback. "She's actually speaking up for me? I was rude and mean to her earlier, but she's still willing to help me." Daniel turned his attention to the kids and saw them staring at him with teary eyes. A stiff smile remained on his face, and it took him some time before he could finally put on a warmer and more approachable expression. "I was too impulsive earlier, kids, and I am sorry. I promise I will be more patient and won't hurt anyone anymore." Still, the kids remained wary. Roxanne's heart ached a little. She stood up and made her way to Daniel before gesturing for him to put his hand out. He had no idea what she was planning, but he complied anyway. A handful of colorful candies landed on his palm soon after. "Come look. He has so many candies. If you behave and do as he says, you can have one," said Roxanne with a smile to get the kids to listen. Despite the candy Daniel was holding, his smile still seemed a little awkward. That made the kids scared. Unfortunately, they couldn't resist the sweet temptation, so they hesitantly made their way to him. After a bit of coordination, all 4 doctors were given some patience. Roxanne breathed a sigh of relief and returned to her post to work away. Silence descended upon the cubicle. Occasionally, the sounds of the kids joking and playing around rang out, but they kept it soft. It was almost as though they were worried about disturbing the doctors. The more Roxanne worked, the heavier her heart felt. Their first round was a simple examination of the kids' pulse and getting an idea of how their health was. Those with more complicated medical issues would have to receive extra treatment. When Roxanne first saw the abandoned kids, she was already heartbroken for them. Actually treating their condition made her feel even worse. Some of the kids had milder issues and could be cured with some medicine or via acupuncture. Unfortunately, the doctors on site couldn't help those with more complicated issues. All they could do was send the kids to the hospital, where the Damaris family would pay for their medical fees. The first few kids Roxanne treated all had mild issues, and she was just about to sigh in relief when she examined a kid with a more serious condition. The kid was only about 4 or 5 years old and was around Archie's and Benny's age. His round, chubby face was tense with nervousness. When Roxanne looked into those big, round eyes, her heart ached so much that she couldn't speak for a moment. "Am I very sick?" asked the kid fearfully. A lump lodged itself in Roxanne's throat. She didn't have the guts to answer that question because she worried that her voice would be thick with tears if she spoke. The kid ended up consoling her instead. "It's fine. I'm just an orphan nobody loves anyway, so no one will be sad even if my condition is bad. Don't feel bad for me. Your eyes are getting all red with tears." The place was quiet, so everyone heard what the kid said. Feeling helpless, Roxanne dug her fingers into her palms before turning around to ask the others for help. She had lost a kid once and couldn't bear the situation before her now. Lack paused. He made his way over to them and stroked the boy's head. "Don't worry. We'll take you to the hospital, and you will be fine." The kid shifted his gaze and looked right at Roxanne. He wanted an answer from her. Roxanne took a deep breath and suppressed her urge to cry. She made herself smile and promised, "You will be fine, and you are not a kid nobody loves. Once you've recovered, someone will come for you and adopt you. You will have a daddy and a mommy, and you will grow up happy and healthy. That is why you must be good and let us treat your illness, okay?" The kid's eyes glowed at the mention of a daddy and a mommy. Eager and filled with anticipation, he asked, "Is it true? Will I really have a daddy and a mommy? Even though I am so sick?" Roxanne's heart clenched in her chest. The kid's words suggested that he knew exactly how bad his situation was. Yet, he was more worried about whether someone would love him for a moment. Roxanne was tempted to take the kid away. However, when she thought about how she couldn't give him a proper family, she had no choice but to shove that desire aside. "You will be fine. Also, you're so cute that everyone will be fighting to have you," cooed Roxanne as she caressed his cheek. The kid smiled brightly and nodded excitedly. He was so happy that his face was turning a little red. Jack had participated in quite a few similar events, but his heart would still ache when he witnessed something like that. He had to take a few seconds to compose himself before he could shout at the workers outside. "Get someone to send the kid to a hospital." Soon, a man showed up and smiled at the kid before offering his arms. The boy got out of bed and obediently climbed into the worker's arms. Before he left, he turned around and waved at Roxanne. "Bye." Then he looked at the other kids from the orphanage and bid them goodbye as well. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.